Hey fighters, welcome to English Story School. This is the life-changing story for every struggler. Let's begin the story. Part 1. What would you trade for freedom? Have you ever stopped in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, silence thick around you, and asked yourself, what does freedom really mean? Is it about having no one to answer to? Being able to speak, move, live without chains? Or is it about something much deeper, something raw, something sacred, something that burns in your chest when the world tries to crush your voice? Freedom is not just a word. It's a war. That war was Elijah Parker's reality. He wasn't born into a life of comfort or silver spoons. In fact, he was raised in a town that looked like it had been forgotten by time, with cracked sidewalks, broken windows, and the constant scent of metal and dust from factories that hadn't worked in years. Rusted dreams littered the streets like yesterday's trash. Hope. It was a foreign concept. People didn't dream there, they survived. But Elijah wasn't like the others. While most kids in his neighborhood chased distractions to numb the pain, drugs, violence, or dead-end parties, Elijah chased something different. Purpose. He had no father, and his mother worked 3 jobs just to put beans on the table. Life was unfair, yes, but Elijah never once used that as an excuse. There was something untamable about him. A fire. A storm, a hunger. You can cage a man, but not his spirit. And Elijah's spirit, it roared. He wasn't top of his class, not because he lacked the brains, but because he refused to play by the system's rules. Teachers called him a rebel. Principals labeled him a problem. But he was none of those things. He was a seeker, searching for something more, something real. Late nights, while others slept, Elijah stared at the stars from his rooftop. There's more, he'd whisper. There has to be more. And in those moments, with the cold biting his skin and silence echoing in his ears, he made a vow. I will not be another broken man in a broken town. I will rise, whatever it takes. But here's the brutal truth no one tells you. The second you decide to rise, the world decides to test you. That test came swiftly. One evening, as Elijah walked home from the library, arms full of secondhand books, dreams bigger than his backpack, he was stopped by 3 older boys. Local thugs. The kind of guys who had already given up on life and wanted everyone else to drown with them. They circled him like wolves, smirking. "What you got there, genius?" One sneered, snatching a book titled The Power of One from his hand. "Just give it back," Elijah said, calm but firm. Another pushed him. "Or what? You gonna quote poetry at us?" They laughed, but Elijah didn't flinch. He looked each one in the eye and said quietly, "You think you're free because you can beat someone down? That's not freedom. That's fear. And you're prisoners of it." That line hit like thunder. For a second, just a second, they were silent. Then came the punches. Blood on his shirt, cuts on his face, but Elijah didn't fight back. Not because he was weak, but because he understood something deeper. His fight wasn't with them. It was with the idea that he had no future. A man with a purpose doesn't waste energy proving his worth to the lost. The next day, bruised and limping, he was back at the library. Same books, same seat, same fire in his eyes. Nothing, not fists, not fear, not failure, could shake his mission. Because here's the thing, Elijah had already made peace with one truth. Real freedom has a cost, and he was willing to pay it. Not for attention, not for revenge, but because he wanted to rewrite the story of his bloodline. He wanted to become the man his future children would be proud of. The kind of man who doesn't run when life hits hard, but stands taller. As days turned into weeks, Elijah began crafting a plan. Not just an escape route, but a blueprint for change. He researched scholarships, wrote essays by candlelight, applied to programs in cities no one in his neighborhood had ever seen. His mother worried. His friends mocked. But Elijah moved in silence, with the intensity of someone who knew his soul would suffocate if he stayed trapped. One day, while walking home, an old man from the neighborhood, known as Pops, called out to him. Pops was a former civil rights activist, now old, tired, and mostly ignored. "I see you, boy," he said, eyes sharp despite his age. "You walk like a man who's already seen the mountain." Elijah smiled, unsure how to respond. Pops nodded. "Just remember, the higher the climb, the colder the wind. But that view, it's worth every scar." Those words stuck with Elijah like glue. Freedom isn't handed down. It's climbed toward. By the time Elijah turned 18, he had been rejected by 23 programs and accepted into just one. It wasn't Ivy League. It wasn't flashy, but it was out. And to him, that meant everything. He stood on the edge of his town that final morning, bag in hand, heart pounding, eyes misty. Behind him were years of pain, struggle, and silent battles. Ahead of him was the unknown. But Elijah didn't hesitate, because he knew freedom doesn't come when everything is perfect. It comes when you choose to leap while still bleeding. He took the first step, then the next, and with every foot forward, he whispered, "I'm not my past. I'm not this place. I'm not what they said I'd be. I am free." And that, my friend, is how a boy from a forgotten town began writing a legacy that could never be erased. Part 2. The price tag of the dream. Elijah Parker didn't win the lottery, but he won something rarer, a scholarship, a ticket out, a chance to breathe air that wasn't soaked in despair. When he first stepped onto the campus of the prestigious Redwood University, it felt like stepping into another universe. The roads were smooth. The buildings looked like castles. Students walked with ease, laughing freely, dressed in branded confidence, their futures already carved out in gold. There were no broken windows, no empty lunchboxes, no sirens screaming in the distance. For the first time, Elijah saw what opportunity actually looked like, and it looked nothing like home. But dreams come with price tags, and Elijah was about to learn how expensive his would be. At first, the pain was silent. In group discussions, when Elijah spoke, people pretended not to hear him. His southern accent, thick, raw, real, drew smirks. Professors looked surprised when his essays shined. Classmates whispered behind his back. "Affirmative action, baby," someone muttered once. He heard it. He never forgot it. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Winston Churchill. Elijah didn't snap back. He didn't fight to be accepted. He fought to survive. He took notes furiously, recorded lectures, studied until his eyes burned. While others partied, Elijah stocked shelves. While his roommates slept, he mopped floors in a late-night diner. While others flew home for holidays, he scrubbed toilets in empty dorm buildings to make rent. He worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, ate cheap noodles, and lived off vending machine coffee. He missed birthdays. He missed calls from his mom. He missed being human, but he didn't complain. He reminded himself every day. Comfort zones are just invisible prisons. There were nights he broke down, silently, in the cold dorm showers where no one could hear him cry. There were mornings he questioned everything, wondering if it was worth it, if maybe going back home wasn't giving up, just giving in. But then he'd open his notebook. Page 1, in bold red letters. They tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. That line lived with him like armor. He had written it in the back of a fast food receipt the day he left home. Every time he opened that notebook, it reminded him why he started. Because freedom, real freedom, isn't comfort. It's commitment. It's sacrifice. It's the choice to bleed so your future can breathe. And Elijah bled, mentally, physically, spiritually. In his second semester, he failed a major exam, not because he didn't know the content, but because he collapsed from exhaustion in the library at 3 a.m. His body had hit the wall. He woke up 2 hours after the paper ended, surrounded by half-eaten energy bars and open textbooks. His heart shattered. He walked into the professor's office the next morning, sunken eyes, voice cracked, hands trembling. I didn't make excuses, Elijah would later say. I told the truth. The professor looked at him, and instead of sympathy, offered truth. You're in the big leagues now. No one's going to carry you here. Either you stand or you sink. Elijah nodded. No tears, no begging, just steel in his spine. Because this was no longer about a grade. It was about proving, not to the world, but to himself, that he belonged. The world doesn't give you a place. You build your own. So he rebuilt. Smarter. Stronger. He switched his graveyard diner job to weekend only. Cut out social media. Created a strict calendar. Blocks of time for reading, research, rest. He started working out. Not to build muscle, but to build discipline. And he began journaling, pouring his rage, his fears, his dreams into ink, crafting a roadmap for the man he was becoming. In time, things began to shift. A professor noticed his essay and recommended it for a student paper award. Another invited him to a leadership circle. He was offered a small mentorship by a visiting tech entrepreneur who saw his drive and said, "You've got scars. Use them as your brand." Even then, Elijah knew this was not the end of struggle. It was just a different battlefield. Freedom wasn't about walking away from chains. It was about learning how to walk with wounds and still win. Every scar I carry is a receipt, proof that I paid the price to keep moving forward. But perhaps the most powerful moment came during a student event where the theme was, "What does freedom mean to you?" Elijah stood in front of a crowd, voice calm, back straight, eyes fierce. He didn't recite a speech. He told a story about the broken streets, the bullying, the hunger, the fights no one saw, the nights he felt like quitting, the line he'd written on that receipt, and what freedom meant to him. Freedom is not comfort. It's choosing to become who you were meant to be, even when everything around you tells you to sit down and shut up. The room was silent. Then came the claps. And for the first time, Elijah didn't feel like an outsider pretending to belong. He felt like a man who had earned his place. Part 3. Burn me, I won't bow. They say the final year is the home stretch. The victory lap. The grand finale after years of struggle. But for Elijah Parker, it was a battlefield drenched in fire. Just when he thought he was close to the mountaintop, life hit him with a storm that shattered every illusion of peace. His mother, the very heartbeat of his journey, the woman who raised him with tired hands and trembling hope, fell dangerously ill. No warning, no cushion, just fear. The phone call came in the middle of his research class. Elijah, it's your mom. She's in the hospital. Time froze. His pen dropped. The walls of the classroom started spinning. That night, he sat alone in his dorm, knees to his chest, staring at the glow of his phone screen. No insurance, no savings, no safety net, just towering hospital bills, endless prescriptions, and doctors who spoke in numbers he couldn't even comprehend. And then came the choice, the cruel, soul-breaking choice. Stay and finish, or return and rescue. But Elijah? He didn't believe in either slash or. He believed in both. He always had. When your back is against the wall, you don't fold, you find your spine. So, for 6 brutal months, he lived 2 lives. By day, he was still Elijah the student, writing papers, attending lectures, giving presentations with a smile that barely hid the chaos behind it. By night, he was Elijah the provider, working double shifts at a local warehouse, transferring every spare dollar home. And in between, he was the son, calling his mother from bathroom stalls and quiet corners, whispering prayers between her coughing fits. He lived off stale sandwiches and vending machine coffee. Slept no more than 2 hours a night. Sometimes on a library couch. Sometimes on the floor. Once on the bench outside the hospital during a weekend visit home. Too broke to afford a hotel, too proud to ask anyone for help. His body? Wrecked. His mind? Hanging by threads. But his will? Unbreakable. One night, after a particularly brutal warehouse shift, he walked 5 miles back to campus in freezing rain because his paycheck was short and he couldn't afford the bus. His shoes were soaked, his hands numb, his soul hollow. Halfway through the journey, Elijah stopped under a flickering streetlight. The sky above looked like it didn't care. And maybe it didn't. He tilted his head upward, fists clenched, rain running down his cheeks like tears. "What more do you want from me?" he screamed. It wasn't drama. It wasn't weakness. It was the sound of a man who had given everything and still felt like it wasn't enough. Just then, a figure emerged from the mist, an old man walking his dog. He paused, looked Elijah dead in the eyes, and said something that would never leave him. "Son, when life asks for more, it's preparing you for more." The words hit like thunder, not because of their poetry, but because of their timing. Pain is not punishment. Sometimes it's preparation. That moment, it seared into Elijah's soul like a brand. He didn't cry after that. He didn't scream again. He just got colder, clearer, stronger, because something inside him had snapped, not in defeat, but in defiance. He started carrying a card in his wallet that read, "Burn me, I won't bow." It became his personal creed. Every night he thought about quitting, he touched that card. Every time he heard his mom's tired voice, he remembered why he couldn't fall now, not after how far he'd come. And so, with his spirit bloodied but unbeaten, Elijah kept going. He turned in every paper, aced every final, showed up to every class, even if he hadn't slept. His professors noticed. One pulled him aside and said, "I don't know what you're carrying, but whatever it is, you're turning it into gold." By the end of the year, Elijah stood on the stage of the university auditorium, cap on head, gown on shoulders, and pain in his bones. But in that moment, he was free. Not free like the brochures promised. Not free like the kids who had money, connections, and no bruises. No, he was free because he had earned it with every scar. Graduation isn't a celebration of intelligence. It's proof you didn't surrender. Elijah didn't just graduate with honors. He graduated with honor. When his name was called, he walked across that stage not as a student, but as a storm that refused to be silenced. And when he looked out at the crowd and saw his mother, thin, still healing, but alive, clapping with tears streaming down her face, he made a silent promise. No matter where I go, what I build, or how high I climb, I will never forget what it cost to be truly free. Because the world may forget the struggle behind the smile, but Elijah Parker never would. His fire had been tested by life, burned by fate, and soaked in storms. But it never went out. It only burned brighter. Part 4. Trust is a loaded gun. Years had passed. The boy who once stood in the shadows of broken factories now walked through the same streets as a man who had built something from nothing. Elijah didn't return home in a fancy car or wearing a gold watch. He returned with purpose in his eyes and fire in his chest. Not to show off, but to show up. But here's the truth no one tells you. Success doesn't guarantee acceptance. The people who watch you grow don't always know how to handle your growth. Some admired him. Some doubted him. Some even hated him. But Elijah wasn't here for applause. He was here for war, a war against hopelessness, against silence, against the idea that where you're born defines where you die. The youth center he built wasn't just bricks and paint. It was defiance turned into a structure. Every room was a message. You matter. He named it the Phoenix Nest, because just like him, every kid walking through those doors carried ashes in their lungs, but also wings in their bones. They just needed help learning how to fly. He gave them more than textbooks and speeches. He gave them his time, his heart, his truth. Freedom, he said during his first speech at the center, is not a switch you flip. It's a muscle you build. Day after day, rep after rep, tear after tear. And Elijah didn't preach perfection. He showed them scars. This one, he'd point to a mark on his hand, is from a kitchen job at 3 a.m. while preparing for an 8 a.m. exam. Another scar, this time invisible, he'd explain, is from hearing I didn't belong, from people who wore ties but never lived my nights. He taught them resilience like a coach trains fighters. When life punches you, he'd say, don't just stand up. Learn the rhythm. Dodge. Strike. Keep your eyes open even when your heart wants to shut down. But more than anything, Elijah taught them trust. Not blind trust. Not naive trust. But a trust that was forged in fire. Trust, he told them, is a loaded gun. In the wrong hands, it can destroy. In the right hands, it can protect everything you love. He learned that the hard way. One of the early mentors he hired for the center was someone from the neighborhood. A man named Marcus, once a role model, once someone Elijah looked up to as a teen. Elijah trusted him blindly. But weeks later, Elijah discovered Marcus had been taking money from the program. Money meant for books, for meals, for kids. Gone. That betrayal didn't just hurt his center. It wounded his soul. For days, Elijah locked himself in his office. He didn't cry. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't afford the luxury of breaking. People were watching. Kids were watching. If he fell, it wasn't just him who would be crushed. It was the dream that carried their names too. When he finally stepped out, he didn't pretend nothing had happened. He gathered the kids and said, "Sometimes the people you trust the most will be the ones who shake your foundation. But don't let that stop you from building. Just reinforce your foundation. Build smarter. Trust wiser." He filed charges, took accountability, and rebuilt, not in silence, but with louder purpose. He updated every policy in the center, introduced transparency in budgeting, created youth councils where teenagers could make real decisions. Elijah believed, if you don't give the youth power, someone else will. And not everyone's hands are clean. Soon, the Phoenix Nest became more than just a building. It became a movement. Volunteers poured in. Speakers came from other countries to listen, not just to Elijah, but to the voices he had raised. Those voices came from boys who once sold candy on the corner, from girls who were told they'd never be more than statistics, from teens who thought silence was safety, until Elijah taught them their voices were weapons. He began speaking in schools across the country, then prisons, then international stages. But no matter where he went, he never wore a mask of success. "I don't tell stories about winning," he'd say. "I tell stories about not giving up when the world handed me 1,000 reasons to." At one global youth summit, he was asked, "What's the most dangerous thing you've ever done?" He smiled and said, "I told the truth." And that truth wasn't pretty. He told them about the nights he had no food but gave his dinner money to a kid who was hungrier. He told them about watching his mother fade in a hospital bed while he stayed awake for days, trying to keep up with classes. He told them how every single stage he stood on was built with bricks made from pain, fear, failure, and forgiveness. Elijah believed that being vulnerable was power. The strongest leaders, he'd say, aren't the ones who hide their wounds. They're the ones who show them, so others know they're not alone. The youth loved him not because he was perfect, but because he was real. One day, a teenage boy came to him and said, "I don't want to live anymore. Everyone around me either dies or disappears." Elijah didn't offer cliches. He sat beside the boy, looked him in the eye, and whispered, "You're right. The world can be brutal, but the fact that you're still breathing, that's resistance, that's rebellion, and that's hope. Let's turn that breath into something unstoppable." That boy later went on to become one of the center's directors. That's what Elijah's legacy became. Not inspiration, but ignition. He lit fires in broken hearts. He turned pain into purpose. And he made sure every kid he met understood this. Freedom doesn't mean escaping your past. It means owning it, transforming it, and using it to rewrite your future. And when asked how he survived it all, Elijah would say, "I didn't survive. I burned, and I rebuilt, and I chose to rise every single time." That's real freedom. Part 5, I paid in scars and earned my sky. Now, Elijah is more than a man. He's a force, a storm, a signal fire for those still trapped in the darkness he once knew too well. But don't mistake him for a celebrity. He doesn't live for stages, lights, or applause. His mission? Bigger than attention. His journey? Deeper than recognition. Elijah didn't rise to escape his past. He rose to rewrite it, for himself and for anyone who ever thought they couldn't. He walks the same cracked sidewalks where he once ran barefoot, not with pity, but with purpose. The boy who once couldn't afford a textbook now funds entire libraries. The student who was mocked for his accent now translates speeches in multiple languages, because wisdom shouldn't come with a price tag. He didn't just beat the system. He learned how it worked, and then bent it until it served those it once ignored. But here's what no one claps for: the quiet nights he still spends alone, staring at the ceiling, haunted by memories that didn't vanish just because he succeeded. The phone calls he still dials to voices that will never answer. The scars that healed but left him different. Because growth isn't clean. It's messy. It's ugly. And sometimes it hurts more after the healing than during the wound. Elijah paid in scars, but what he earned was sky. He built a future not just with vision, but with sacrifice. He turned his pain into blueprints and his doubts into concrete. And he poured all of it into the Youth Horizon Center, the one he dreamed of during sleepless nights and endless shifts. Inside its walls, laughter, learning, second chances. Kids who were born into brokenness but are now building brilliance. Not because someone saved them, but because someone believed in them long enough for them to believe in themselves. Elijah doesn't lecture. He listens. He doesn't preach from a podium. He sits on the floor, eye to eye with kids whose stories sound like echoes of his own. He teaches them what no school ever did: that freedom is earned in inches, that every no you survive brings you closer to a yes that matters. That real power doesn't come from privilege. It comes from persistence. He often says, "I don't want to be admired. I want to be duplicated." His calendar is full, not with parties, but with promises. Visits to prisons, foster homes, rehabs, shelters, not to deliver inspiration, but to remind people that survival is not shameful. It's sacred. That if they're still breathing, they're still building. That if their dreams scare them, they're aiming right. He's been offered awards, honors, even political positions. Most of them he declined. "I'm not a statue," he said once. "I'm still in motion." And yet, even as he climbs, he still remembers every fall. He writes letters to his younger self, letters he sometimes shares during his talks, letters that begin with things like, "I know you're tired. I know you're scared, but I swear to you, it's worth it." One of his most powerful speeches wasn't even delivered at a conference. It was whispered to a teenager in a hospital bed after a suicide attempt. Elijah sat beside him for hours. No cameras, no audience, just presence, just honesty, just two broken boys, one from the past, one from the present, holding on to the same fragile thread of hope. When that boy survived and eventually graduated, he mailed Elijah a letter that said, "You didn't save me. You reminded me I was worth saving." That's who Elijah became. Not a brand, a bridge, not a hero, a mirror for those too afraid to look at their reflection. He doesn't pretend it's easy. In fact, he tells people outright, "I'm still healing, still learning, still showing up." Because that's the truth most people never hear, that the climb never really ends. It just becomes your calling. And now, to every soul listening, especially you, the one who's been told you're too late, too small, too damaged, Elijah would say this: "Good. That means you're dangerous. That means your rise will break ceilings. That means you've got what most people spend their whole lives chasing: grit. If you feel trapped, good. That means you've recognized the cage. If you feel alone, good. That means you've stopped blending in with the noise. If you feel underestimated, good. That means you're about to do something unforgettable. Because you weren't made for safety. You were made for story. And the world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more proof. Proof that scars don't disqualify you, they define you. That fear isn't a stop sign, it's a compass. That pain doesn't bury you, it plants you. So when you rise, and you will, don't rise quietly. Rise like thunder. Rise like truth. Rise like Elijah did. And never forget what it cost to earn your sky. Don't wish for easy. Wish for worth it. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.